Hi, thanks for joining me. For those of you new to my channel, my name is Mindy Mandell, and in each video I talk about some aspect of Platonism. So recently I've been thinking about theurgy, and I decided that, I should make a video on that. So let's get into it. What is theurgy? Well, it's rooted in two Greek words, theos, which means God, and ergos, which means work. And so we can think of theurgy as divine work or the work of the gods, or more loosely, we can think of it as working with the gods. And this translation, I think, fits very nicely what we're doing with theurgy, because our goal in engaging in theurgic exercises or practices is to tap into the higher energies of the gods so that we can participate more fully in the higher realms of reality. Now, unfortunately, much of the theurgic practices of ancient days are lost to us. We do, of course, have Plato's dialogues, and we have, of course, some of the writings of the later Platonists, but we don't know a lot about the accompanying practices that they used in ancient times. This is unfortunate because in all of our work with Platonism in general, we're aiming to transform from within. So while it's important to read books and to talk about theories, it's not enough by itself. We need to internalize our insights, and that is where theurgic practices come in. Some of what I'm going to cover today actually overlaps with an earlier video that I did called Transformation. In that video, I was focusing specifically on internalizing our readings, and so there will be some overlap with today, but it's a little different, and the two videos are standalone. For those of you interested, though, I will link that one at the end. Now, some of the methods that I'm going to talk about in this video are ones that I use regularly, whereas others I either rarely use or not at all. And it's fine not to use all of them. My intention of giving a number of different techniques today is because I want you to be able to choose what fits you. We each have a different lifestyle, different personality. Some of us have more time than others. And so for various reasons, some of these techniques will appeal to you more than others. And that's fine. I just encourage you to incorporate the ones that you like into your life. All right, in this video, I'm going to draw from this little book. It's a lovely little book called The Unfolding Wings by Tim Addy, and it's put out by the Prometheus Trust. And by the way, a couple years ago, I guess it has been 2 years now, I put out a book that was published by the Prometheus Trust, and Tim Addy was actually the editor of that book, so I had the opportunity of working closely with him. And I know that he is a sincere Platonist, and he is the real thing. Now, I don't get any royalties, of course, off of this book. I'm not trying to sell it to you, but it does happen to be a very good book, and there's a chapter in it on theurgy, and that's what I'm going to be drawing from for today's video. So first, I want to say a few words about theurgy in general, and then I will go into some specific techniques. So with all theurgy, our focus, our aim is always this one-pointed focus. And that means that we don't want to let the mind wander. We want to stay in the here and the now, focusing on whatever activity it is that we're engaging in. Doing this brings unity to the soul, and that also raises our energy. Now, those of you familiar with Platonic metaphysics probably recognize this relationship between unity and energy. In our metaphysics, we talk about the realms of reality unfolding into greater and greater differentiation. The higher realms, if you will, or the more profound realms, reality itself is most unified, and then it unfolds from there. And the more unified the realm is, the higher energy at which it functions. And we're going to see that much of any kind of spiritual practice or philosophic practice, any wisdom tradition, is about bringing unity to the soul and participating in those higher realms. And the more unified our soul is when we have this one-pointed focus, when our mind is not jumping around to practical matters we have to deal with, or some gossip that we heard, or some problem that we're having with a friend. When we're completely just focused on one activity in the here and the now, we're able to function at a higher energy. We're able to penetrate those higher or deeper, if you will, realms of reality. And we're going to see this as the functioning of providence. The law of providence basically states that we can participate in higher realms to the degree that we are able to. And this basic law of providence is going to run through every theurgic practice that we look at today. Now, wanting to participate in these higher realms also means that we need to make these practices a habit of the soul. We need to make this one-pointed focus a habit of the soul. Now, maybe after this video, you'll see some technique that is curious for you and you'll want to try it, and maybe it will bring you some peace of mind. Maybe you'll have a positive experience doing it, but it's really through repetition that you're going to get the full benefit of that theurgic practice. While the first time may feel nice, it's through repetition, by making a routine out of it, that your soul gets the habit of going into one-pointed focus every time you try that practice. And then eventually that one-pointed focus, that state of mind that is nurtured through this practice, is going to spread to even times when you're not doing the practice. And so that's really the goal. Now, here's something that Tim Eddy tells us. And by the way, wherever I put his quotes, I did include the page numbers for those of you who might have the book. He says that what changes in worship is the worshipper. The providential energies of the gods are ever flowing. By true worship, we fit ourselves to receive them. And this is a principle that runs throughout. The goal of all theurgic practices is for us, the practitioner, to change and to grow. So we're not pulling the gods closer to us. We're pulling ourselves closer to the gods. Now, theurgy, we're going to find, is consistent with the threefold nature of the realms of reality. In metaphysics, we often talk about reality as having this sort of threefold nature. We might talk about it as being, life, and intellect. Or sometimes we'll talk about abiding, proceeding, and reverting. Another common construct is essence, power, and activity. Now, in an analogous way, we can understand theurgy using this threefold construct. And by the way, the three different ways of talking about the realms of reality, they're not separate from one another. They all are included: essence and being and abiding. That's what it is. It sits in itself. Power is life, it's movement, if you will. It's that proceeding. And activity is the intellectual act of reverting to its causes. Okay, with that behind us, I do have other videos where I go into that in more detail. But what I want to discuss now is that in an analogous way, we can understand theurgy using this threefold construct. Its essence, or what it is a means to collect our knowledge into one. Its power is that it awakens within us the providential energies of the gods. So that's the energy or the power of it. And then by using this providential energies, theurgy allows us to intellectually revert to our causes. In other words, it brings us into union with the gods. Okay, there are 6 areas of theurgic practice that Tim Eddy highlighted. You might want to think of these more as aspects rather than practices, because they're not really intended to be used mutually exclusive to one another. Okay, so first I'm just going to give you the list, and then I'm going to go through each one individually. So we're going to look at prayer, hymns, sacrifice, which is greatly misunderstood, ritual actions, invocations, invoking the names of the gods, and also meditation and contemplation. This last one is where I focused on that earlier video that I mentioned before. But I will say a few more words about it though today. Now again, one or more of these may not appeal to you, and that's fine. Just start with what does appeal to you, and the ones you pass over may become more appealing as your state of mind changes. Or maybe they won't, and that's fine. Everybody is different, and personally, I think that's the way it should be. All right, so getting into the 6, the first one is prayer. And here is Tim Eddy's definition of prayer. He says that prayer is the communion between beings of different levels of consciousness and especially the movement of conversion towards those of a higher level of being. Now, we tend to think of prayer as begging the gods to order our external world the way we want it to be. This is a common image of prayer. We're small and helpless, and we're hoping for God's mercy. However, this is not the way that Platonists pray. Remember, all of our theurgic practices are carried out with the law of providence in mind. We are not trying to pull the gods down to us. We are trying to raise ourselves up to the gods. The law of providence states that we are neither small nor helpless. We are divine intellectual essences that can participate in higher realms to the degree that we are currently able to. Our goal is to purify our souls of whatever it is that pulls us away from one-pointed focus on truth. This is how we raise our energies so that we can participate more fully in higher realms of mind. Here's a quote from Iamblichus, and this is from On the Mysteries. He says that the continual exercise of prayer nourishes the vigor of our intellect, and it renders the receptacles of the soul far more capacious for the communications of the gods. He goes on to say that it likewise is the divine key which opens to men and women, of course, the penetralia of the gods, or the innermost or secret, most hidden aspect of the gods. It accustoms us to the splendid rivers of spaternal light. In a short time, it perfects our inmost recesses and disposes them for the ineffable embrace and contact of the gods. And it does not desist till it raises us to the summit of all. Now, we can incorporate prayer in our lives in various ways. We might pray before reading or getting into a philosophical discussion. In a few of Plato's dialogues, there is a character who says that we should always pray before embarking on philosophical discussions. Timaeus is one dialogue that comes to mind off the top of my head, but there are others as well. Also, by the way, talking to our daimon is also a form of prayer. And we can do this simply by turning inward. Now, at first, it may not feel natural to do this. It may feel strange, but over time, it does become second nature. And also important is that with practice, we start to recognize what it feels like when this voice of wisdom speaks to us, because it does have a unique feel to it, and it's one that we absolutely need to learn. Okay, I'm going to go on now to hymns. Now, the thing about hymns is that it combines the logos of prayer and contemplation with the beauty of music in harmony. So the these hymns, of course, were often sung, but you can read them as poetry as well. And if you're a person who likes poetry, or a person who is musical, and especially if you both like poetry and music, then hymns can really be a powerful theurgic tool for you. Now, I admit that this is one area that I personally have never much cared for. I'm neither into poetry or music, but I do know people who are strongly moved by hymns. So I think it's worth giving them a try. Maybe they'll work for you, who knows? The most famous are perhaps the Orphic hymns. Here's one that Tim Addy included in his book, and it's called To Love, as you can see, and I'm going to read it because you really don't want to hear me sing. It says, I call great love the source of sweet delight, holy and pure and charming to the sight, darting and winged, impetuous, fierce desire, with gods and mortals playing wandering fire. Agile and twofold, keeper of the keys of heaven and earth, the air and spreading seas, of all that Ceres' fertile realms contains, by which the all-parent goddess life sustains. Or dismal Tartarus is doomed to keep widely extended o'er the sounding deep. For thee all nature's various realms obey, who rulest alone with universal sway. Come, blessed power, regard these mystic fires, and far avert unlawful mad desires. Okay, I'm going to go on now to sacrifice. Now, if the common image of prayer is begging, then the common image of sacrifice would be tossing in a bribe to go with our begging. Now, of course, this is not at all what sacrifice is really all about. Tim Addy tells us this. He says that sacrifice is a symbolic act which acknowledges our relationship both to the gods and to the entire macrocosm. The purpose of sacrifice, much like prayer and all the other aspects of theurgy that I'm going to talk about in this video, must be in line with the law of providence. Okay, and I'm already sounding like a broken record, aren't I? But we're aiming to lift the eye of the soul to bring it into communion with the gods. That is what sacrifice is really about. Now, often when we hear the word sacrifice, we think of animal sacrifices. But Tim Addy tells us that this was actually controversial even in ancient times. And we certainly are not going to sacrifice animals today. So a sacrifice may be an offering of fruit, or maybe flowers, or perhaps lighting a candle. We can also make non-material sacrifices in the form of our thoughts, and it may be in formal sitting meditation, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe we just want to give up the wandering of our thoughts or give up our daydreams, even if only for a set period of time. And as we progress, we're going to find that silence is the highest form of sacrifice. Here's a quote from Porphyry. This is from his Abstinence from Animal Foods. He says, "We should adore him in pure silence and with pure conceptions concerning him. It is necessary, therefore, that, being conjoined and assimilated to him, we should offer the elevation of ourselves to divinity as a sacred sacrifice. For thus we shall both celebrate him and procure our own salvation." So quite a bit to think about there. Here's something that Tim Addy tells us in his book. He says the symbolic acts of sacrifice serve as living reminders of the part that we play in the good order of the universe. So of course, as we get into metaphysics, we see that this physical world is not ultimate reality. It is part of a greater whole. And as we're studying this whole, we can see how sacrifice then is tying together the various orders and recognizing our place in that whole. And he goes on to say that the very act of offering sacrifices, if of course it's accompanied with a real attempt to enter a state of communion with the gods worshipped, it transforms us and it hastens us toward true virtues. So again, there's the law of providence functioning. Okay, I'm going to go on now to ritual actions. And what I'm focusing on here is two things. One is creating a sense of solemnness in our activities. And also, we want to create a habit in the soul of communion with the gods and affinity towards the gods. And so we're focusing on that repetition. In Tim's book, he includes this quote from Sallust. It says, "That which is divine is not indigent of anything, but the honors which we pay to the gods are performed for the sake of our advantage. And since the providence of the gods is everywhere extended, a certain habitude or fitness is all that is requisite in order to receive their beneficent communications." Okay, we're going to find that we can create our own rituals. And the two key points to keep in mind are creating that sense of solemnness around the activity and also that routine repetition so that we can hasten the habit of the soul. So one example might be saying a prayer every morning. This would focus your thoughts and your intentions for the day. Another possibility would be lighting a candle before reading or before meditating. It creates that sense of solemnness, that mental space, if you will, around the activity to make it feel more profound and to get you more centered in what you're doing. You can also create some kind of daily habit. For example, maybe turning your thoughts upwards at a certain time throughout the day. You may even want to borrow from the Buddhists a mindfulness bell. I think there actually are some apps for this where you can set it to ring every hour, for example, and every time it rings, you turn your thoughts upward, using Platonic thoughts, of course. But with this idea of borrowing from other traditions, we can also make routines out of other traditions like yoga or Tai Chi, or you may want to go into like breathing practices for those of you who don't want to fold up into different contortions as the yogis do. If that's too difficult for you, maybe try pranayama breathing practices, or like the Wim Hof method, or other such breathing techniques could also work as well. If you can make a routine out of it and create a certain pattern of activity to get you centered when you're doing it, to make it more meaningful. Okay, now I'm going to go on to invocations. Here we're talking about invoking the names of the gods. And Tim Addy tells us that when we invoke the higher powers in Theurgy, we are calling ourselves into their presence, not the other way around. So reminding us again of that law of providence. So the key here is in respecting the energizing power of divine names. Now, this is an aspect of theurgy that might feel natural and normal for some of you if you come from a spiritual background. But those of us coming from a secular background are probably going to find this strange. So if you're not open to this idea, then that's totally fine. To be honest, I found it strange initially also, but I do suggest that you keep an open mind about it, and maybe sometime down the road, who knows, it might become more appealing. Tim goes on to explain, divine invocation is effected by the use of ancient names, by an accurate use of epithets and a recall of mythological symbolic actions, and a use of sympathetic times and places. So we're combining the mythological stories that we've learned with our understanding of the deeper meanings that are under the surface. Now, for those of you who want to see more about how to understand the gods in mythology and look for those deeper meanings, I do have a video called The Gods, and I will link it at the end for those of you who are interested. But for now, let's see some examples that Tim Addy gave us. He says, for example, we may invoke the divine Persephone in the spring, for she is the ruler of the seedling soul. But we may better evoke Demeter in the autumn, for to her is the harvest of our soul's labors offered. Likewise, we may invoke Pan in the sacred grove, if you happen to have one, but Hestia besides the hearth or the fireplace. And for those of us who don't have a fireplace, I don't know, maybe we have to use our toaster. I'm not sure. So it may not be the most realistic example, but I think we get the idea. All right, the last category today is meditation and contemplation. And as with everything else that we've looked at today, the key to successful meditations and contemplations is, yes, one-pointed focus. And so our goal here, as with everything else, is to go beyond discursive thoughts. And so don't be afraid to combine this type of theurgy with the other types that we've looked at, like prayer or ritual actions and so on. Now, there are two senses in which we use the word contemplation. The common use is to think deeply about something. And so dialectic, of course, is the formal structure that our contemplations take. But you might also want to review in your thoughts maybe arguments that you've read about, say, what knowledge is or how it differs from right opinion. Now, if you can then hold some image in your mind of what knowledge is, for example, hold it in one-pointed focus, then you can make a meditation of it. The second way that we use the word contemplation is to go beyond this meditation. Here you see a person is sitting in this one-pointed focus, and there's a subject and there's an object. But if you can go beyond that subject-object dynamic of meditation, you can become one with your object of focus. You can kind of disappear, if you will. And instead of thinking about justice, become justice. Instead of thinking about reality, become reality. So all meditation ideally culminates in this form of contemplation. All right, so this was an introduction to 6 different aspects of theurgy. And of course, you can experiment with them, see what works for you. But adding theurgy to our daily routine really is a good idea because it can take our readings beyond that level of conceptual insights. Well, I hope you found that helpful, and if you did, please like and subscribe. And if you hit that little bell, of course, you'll get the notifications. I think you know the routine by now. And I would love to see your comments. I'd like to know, which theurgic practices do you enjoy? Which ones do you find helpful? Which ones not so helpful? So please let me know, and I do hope you'll join me next time. Thank you very much.